Happy the poor in spirit, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Happy the mourning, because they will be comforted. Happy the gentle, because they will inherit the earth. Happy the hungry and the thirsty of righteousness, because they will be filled. Happy the merciful, because they will be shown the mercy. Happy the pure of heart, because they will see God. Happy the peacemakers, because they will be called children of God. Happy the persecuted on account of righteousness, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Happy are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, because your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets before you. Good morning. Welcome to a short biblical reflection on the reading from the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 5 from verse 1 up to 12. After the first verses that make us an introduction to the whole Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel according to Matthew, then follows the Beatitudes. I just read the Beatitudes. Probably you were wondering, surprised about the translation that is unusual. I tried to translate it more literally, following the Greek syntax, which is beautiful, and also the word which quite commonly is translated as blessed. I translated here as happy because this is the first meaning of this word. And this Greek word translates also, for example, the first psalm, where many also translations render it by blessed, but there are some translations, like for example, New Revised Standard Version or Tanaka, the Jewish version, translated by happy. Happy is the man who has not followed the counsel of the wicked. By rendering it blessed, we will push us just something more static, referring to people who already are in glory of eternal life. Why happy is more active, more applies to people who are still living here on earth, because also in fact verse 12 stresses it that the joy, rejoice and be glad, for reward is great in heaven. So therefore naturally would be now to say happy the poor in spirit instead of blessed the poor in spirit. About the Beatitudes, I also did the Bible studies somewhere in November. You may find on my channel an explanation. I compared also the Beatitudes in Matthew's Gospel with the Beatitudes and the woes that we find in Luke's Gospel. I will not go now to this comparison. Looking now at the text as we have, of course, traditionally, even in the Catechism, we can separate the first eight Beatitudes because they have the same form. Has the statement, for example, happy the poor in spirit, happy the mourning, and then comes the second part introduced by the same particle, which I translated here by because theirs is the kingdom of heaven, because they will be comforted, and so on. So all these consequences are generally formulated in a future tense or past tense, while the first one and the eighth one, there is the present tense, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So that expression would also make those two Beatitudes matching, similar, and also they could work, for example, as an inclusion. Otherwise, they also could open two respective parts, because the eighth Beatitude talks about the persecution, which is developed, expanded in the ninth Beatitude, which has now a different formulation, because it's directly formulated to the second person plural. Happy are you when people revile you and persecute you, and so on. And also the 8 and 9 Beatitude, they have the same expression which I translated on account of. Jesus says, when they persecute you on account of me in verse 11, in verse 10, Happy the persecuted on account of righteousness. Therefore, consequently, this word righteousness could apply to Jesus because it's similarly stated on account of me, Jesus says about himself. So being persecuted on account of righteousness is being persecuted on account of Jesus. And consequently, also will be this righteousness which we find in verse 6. Happy the hungry and the thirsty of righteousness, not as just a general statement quality, but also being hungry in particular of Jesus. Because righteousness, this Greek word which is behind, but also the word Hebrew tzedakah which is behind, refers firstly to the quality prerogative of God himself, and that quality prerogative which God shares with us that we may participate in it. I will just yet also mention that some other Beatitudes also is possible to put in pairs of it. They are like matching. For example, happy the morning, they would correspond in verse 4, they would correspond to happy the pure of heart, in particular with the consequence which is stated, because they will be comforted and they will see God. They will be comforted when they will see God. Happy the gentle and happy the peacemakers also could be as synonymous, and the consequences make it also, because they will inherit the earth and they will be called the children of God. Those who are children of God, they will inherit the earth, but the reference would be now here not to this physical earth that we are living now, but the earth to come, the eternal life. And the central to happy the hungry and the thirst of righteousness could be matching with the merciful, in particular because the same word righteousness in Greek as well also in Hebrew, the terms which are behind it, they can also be rendered translated in the sense of charity, alms. So then firstly of charitable works, or this aspect of charity would be similar to mercy. In fact, the same word righteousness appears in at the beginning of chapter 6, where Jesus says, of course, that expression in many translations is not rendered literally, but with different meaning. For example, do not practice your piety, or in some other words, while literally is do not do your righteousness, or do not practice your righteousness. And then follows immediately three practices. The first one is almsgiving, then prayer and fasting. Since this term righteousness could be also synonymous to charitable works aspect, alms, then would be also in chapter 6 similar synonymous to almsgiving, which also stresses that aspect more. And concerning the all Beatitudes, of course, in the lectionary, the reading ends just with the statement, rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, and leaves aside the last statement, which is also very crucial. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets before you. Because all these Beatitudes, this hardship experience, like being poor, weeping, any kind of suffering, as well also doing anything good, justice, and being, because of it, persecuted, can be also only understood in this aspect that Jesus now makes this comparison that those who endure such difficulties, they are similar to the prophets which were persecuted before them. In Lucan Gospel, it is even stressed more because on the side of blessings, we have that formulation, comparison with prophets. But when it's about woes to those who are rich, those who have good life, then in the comparisons with false prophets, which were also remunerated not for warning, not for speaking about the justice, not condemning the injustice. I would like to wish you a nice day, a nice reflection on this gospel reading. God bless you.